process that we have been involved in over the last many months. Just wanted to talk to you about how it all started way back in 2010 when in Seoul, when the G20, in the surrounds of the G20, when a few of us, a few countries got involved, the US, UK, France, India, and we talked about the process of bringing together the businesses and the B20 at that point in time we started working on, and we have been one of the founder organizations with our counterparts across the world since then working in this process of B20. And it was in Bali in November of last year that we took over from our counterpart Kadin, in the Indonesian organization, which was the coordinator of B20 at that point in time, and we took over from them. And since then it's been a process over 10 months of rigorous work, which were after the government at that point in time in November, just before that, appointed Mr. Chandrasekaran to be the chairman of the B20 India, and of course the CII as its secretariat. Since then it's been a process, it's been a great journey, much of it that I would really request the chairman to cover. But I just wanted to mention that we had over 1,500 odd business institutions which were involved with the B20 in the international caucus or in the steering committee, on the task forces that was created. And in these 1,500 people from all over the B20 plus countries, we had also a very interesting, I would imagine for the first time, that we had about 30% plus women representatives in this group. A large number of recommendations, large number of issues were brought through these task forces, but more of that from the chairman. A very interesting feature also was the work that was done by the B20 India on Global South. And over tomorrow, day after, and Sunday, we'll see some of the great speakers from around the world. There are about 70 odd speakers that you will see in these 3 days of the conference that is being put up, with about 50 of them, 50 out of those 71 from other parts of the world. And of course, 25 plus sessions over the 3 days. And one very important feature is B20, but we have 55 countries participating. We have over 1,700 odd people whom you would find this hall will fall short in terms, and therefore we are making arrangements to see that all of them are well accommodated. We'll have trade ministers from all over of many parts of the world who are today in Jaipur who will participate with us tomorrow evening. We of course would, from India, will have the Honorable Prime Minister talking to us on Sunday. We also have other ministers who will be gracing the occasions, the Finance Minister, the External Affairs Minister, of course our Commerce Minister, the Education Minister, of course the G20 Sherpa, besides a large number of businessmen that I talked about. And you will be able to interact with many of them over the next few days. So I'll stop there and welcome you all once again and request the Chairman of the B20 India, Mr. N. Chandrasekaran, the Chairman of Tata Sons, to give his thoughts, his views to all of you, and then probably we'll take a few questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Chandrajit. Good evening to all of you. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to meet with you. We are meeting at a very exciting time for India, just after the successful landing of Chandrayaan yesterday and the B20 final summit tomorrow morning. Needless to say that we are on a excellent economic growth in India. As you know, we are the 5th largest economy, and our growth momentum continues compared to the rest of the world, which is facing a low growth, low inflation situation. And from an Indian point of view, we have a lot of things going for us. Just not the economic growth in terms of whether it is infrastructure-led or consumption-led, but the global transitions that are happening now is placing India very uniquely, be it the digital or artificial intelligence transition or energy transition or supply chain resilience and transition due to the geopolitical situation. In all these transitions, India is extremely well placed. So I'll come to that later. The B20 process has been very exciting. Since we started in late November, December last year, once India took over the mantle from Indonesia, we have been at work with high intensity. The salient points are, we have had a very large scale engagement, both with business leaders in India and business leaders abroad. We have engaged with everyone very early in the process, and at the very start we identified the theme for India's B20 leadership, of course under the overall G20 theme announced by the Prime Minister Vaisudeva Kudumbakam. The B20 theme was acronymed as RAISE, which is for all businesses to come together to deliver a responsible, accelerated, innovative, sustainable and equitable progress for all nations. Of course, the G20 nations, but for the world. So under that theme, we deliberated in terms of what are the key themes that we need to work on. And we came up with overall 9 themes, which were created as 7 task forces and 2 action councils, all addressing what the world economy needs, the world society needs, the global south needs, and to be very specific, these task forces were centered around digital transition and adoption of AI. What does it mean to adopt digital and AI in a scale so that not only businesses but the societies can benefit? Second is, what does it take to build a resilient global supply chain? Third, what does it take to have financing for supply chain, for sustainability? How do we address the sustainability problem? What innovative things that we can do to address the sustainability transition, especially for the global south? And fourth, how do we put policy measures in place to revitalize growth? And what do we do to have an inclusive financial growth, especially MSMEs and low growth economies? Fifth, what do we do in terms of empowerment for women? Then the world, as we move into the future, will require a lot of new skills. What policy measures are required for skilling and mobility? It's not only skills in terms of technology, but also what do we do in terms of cyber? What do we do in terms of artificial intelligence? And women empowerment, greater participation of women across the board. Then specific session on the task force on ESG. How do we tightly integrate ESG in everything, in every business? And then Global South and Africa in particular. How do we do things in such a way that Africa's economic development deeply gets integrated? So these were the themes, and we had task forces comprising all global business leaders. And I must say that all the task force chairs in India, co-chairs and members across the globe have given enormous amount of time, because to come out with policy recommendations that applies to G20 and the world at large requires a lot of consensus building. And we had international caucus with some of the finest minds and business leaders who gave ample time, not only in participating in our calls, but also giving us written inputs. And across all these themes, we have come out with 54 policy recommendations. And each of those policy recommendations have got actions. So it crosses about 170 such actions in all. And they address each of these areas. So you will find 4 or 5 specific recommendations in each subject. And the agenda for the next 2.5 days have been totally around these recommendations. There are sessions which discuss these topics, but of course the B20 communique will be released first thing in the morning. You have a copy of it, which outlines all the recommendations in detail. But we will cover them. What does it mean to have a digital public infrastructure in the global south? What can we learn from what India has done? And what should be the regulatory framework from a generative AI point of view, privacy point of view? How do you raise more private capital to multiply the capital from the multilateral organizations for financing energy transition, sustainability, especially in Global South. How do we collaborate on research, development and innovation across nations? And each one of these areas have been addressed in the recommendations, and it will be discussed at length in each of the sessions that you will see. Of course, we have the first session where we will present the report, and each of the task force chairs will have the opportunity to share all aspects of that particular theme. And one of the unique things that we have done is also we have come up with some follow-up actions which we will also outline during the 2 days, so that the report doesn't stay as a report. What kind of a follow-up mechanism is required in order that we can continue to push the implementation, working with all the G20 nations? Because B20 is a business group. It's a global business group. It provides an excellent platform if we keep it live, vibrant. And we got a lot of inputs from Indonesia. So we studied that. And then we have incorporated certain follow-up mechanisms so that we can carry on from the recommendations that we are making to the G20. And of course, we will start engaging with Brazil the moment they announce their B20 organization. I think those are the inputs I want to give. Otherwise, I can keep talking about each of the recommendations, which I shouldn't do, which will be covered in detail tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a few questions, some of them who have been texting me to ask questions. So I'll start with Srivat. Srivat's of Business Line. Srivat, you there? There's a mic for you, Srivat.
Good evening. I'm Srivat from Business Line newspaper. Mr. Chandrasekaran, thank you for helping us understand what the policy areas are. If you could throw some light on a topic which has been sort of a center stage, which is generative AI, right? So my question is, what is the B20 view on regulating generative AI? Do you think a G20 should take further steps to have a safety mechanism around generative AI? If you could throw some light on the nature of the recommendation.
So I think there is a special session on this tomorrow, which is being attended by Brad Smith from Microsoft, Michael Maybach, myself and Arvind Krishna from IBM, and Shantanu from Adobe. So we're going to talk about this in detail in that session. So I don't want to discuss everyone's viewpoint, but to the extent that is necessary, I will say, definitely the generative AI has a lot to offer. So much can be done in terms of not only business impact, but societal impact. But as all of us know, it requires to be regulated in some form. So how do we come together so that we have a common framework is more important. If we have very disconnected regulations in different parts of the world, then the progress and innovation will be impeded. So how do we regulate it in such a way that we bring responsibility in the use of generative AI, but at the same time, we don't choke innovation. So I'm sure you will hear a lot. So you will hear about generative AI, you will hear about data privacy, you will hear about cyber. All three are equally important.
Well, actually, each of those areas that was mentioned, there will be a session of the 7 task forces and the 2 action councils, and each one would have both overseas and Indian speakers. The program is there with you. If not, you will get it before you leave the room. And each one of them will deliberate on the reports these task forces have actually come out with on the stage, and include the participants to really come out with the final recommendations. I'll move to Ishan Gera. Srivats, we'll take it offline. Yeah.
Hello, sir. Ishan from Economic Times. Hope you're doing well. Sir, in terms of net zero targets, because sustainability is one of the issues that you are covering, do you think companies need to be more aggressive as far as net zero targets are concerned? Because G20 countries have set their own net zero targets, companies are yet to come out with their own. So do you think there needs to be more aggressive approach as far as companies are concerned?
I think it is a very broad question. I think the way I can answer it is depends on the context, which industry you are operating in, which markets you are operating in. In certain markets, in certain industries, company may be emitting a lot more carbon than another company in another market in the same industry. So we've got to start looking at how fast they are improving as opposed to an absolute date. The second thing that you will realize, that is in my experience, I get to participate in a large number of forums on sustainability because of 2 reasons. One is I want to learn, and we have as a group a lot to do. Second, it's a subject that's very close to me, so that I get the opportunity to participate. But what you realize is that this transition is soon becoming a business model change. Everyone recognizes that. So I don't think that it is a mindset of compliance. So when a problem is to be addressed by someone from a compliance mindset, then you need to be pushing how fast we can push the dates. When the problem is being addressed as a business model change, generally you will find all businessmen want to get there fast. So you will find generally people pushing for the transition faster, as long as they can execute and there is a technology and there is a solution. In some places the solution is there. Some places the solution will take time. So it's a calibration that people have to do.
Ashmit Kumar, CNBC. Yeah.
Hi, good evening, sir. Ashmit from CNBC TV18. Thank you so much for taking out time to speak to the media. I have a two-part question. The first one is slightly broader, the second one more specific. The broader question I want to ask you is on the issue of DPI, Digital Public Infrastructure. India, in many respects, has led the way. And while many governments have appreciated those efforts, I just want to get a sense of what the B20 conversations have been like. Do global companies, global corporates see it as an enabler, or is it more of a challenge for the larger business global community? That's the first part. The second part, I want to talk about regulation, more specifically on the question of privacy. Recently, we have had a DPDP bill now turned into an act, and that has been welcomed by very many leaders within here in the country. I just want to get a global perspective on how legislation is being looked at in terms of privacy, and whether there is an apprehension or a fear of over-regulation For instance, in digital space alone, in India, we have about 4 legislations that are coming in. So is there an apprehension of perhaps over-regulation in the larger global business community?
So I think this will be very much in the center of the discussion tomorrow. So we'll definitely talk about both the questions that you asked. The limited quick answer I can give you is that what India has done in this area is excellent, and it's largely welcomed by everyone. And India has a lot to contribute and has an opportunity to implement it and influence other markets. So we will definitely address it tomorrow in the panel.
Thank you. Rick Kumdu of the Mint. Yeah, sorry.
Hi sir, I have a question on the Indian economy. So while most of the capital expenditure that has been made is done by the government, there are some concerns within the policymakers that, you know, there just isn't enough capex from the private sector. And I mean, overall, within certain sectors, yes, there are, but overall there are none. So I'd like to understand why is this so and how can this be addressed? Thank you.
I can't really talk for everyone, but from our point of view, I think the amount of capex that we are spending is very significant. I've already spoken multiple times, and the 5-year period, our capital investment is in excess of $90 billion for the Tata Group. So I don't think it's true that private sector is not committing capital. I think different businesses will take different calls based on the sector they are in and based on the returns they see for a particular project, but I don't think that that is holding back.
Back to the survey that we had conducted very recently, we've seen across the sectors the capacity utilization being somewhere around 75 to 80% in most cases. So which means that obviously more investments are coming in from the private sector is pretty much there. And as was mentioned, other sectors and other groups are also looking at pretty much coming out clearly from the recent survey, which we can of course share with you offline too. Mohit Bhalla, ET Now.
Hi Chandra, this is Mohit Bhalla from the Economic Times actually, just a small correction. You know, just a simple question, what are the 1 or 2 outcomes that you expect from this congregation of, you know, so many people over the next couple of days? Your expectation on that?
I think great question. I think for me the most important thing is the outreach in terms of the recommendations, because the subjects are fully aligned in terms of, I don't think there will be any dispute, whether you talk to media or whether you talk to businessmen or government, that we need to get the world onto digital and AI transition, because the benefits are very visible and everybody can see the potential, but it has to be done in a responsible way. So how do we unlock that potential? Similarly, you talk climate transition. Similarly, when you talk about how do we really help the MSMEs across the globe, how do you put money in their hands? How do you make it easy for them? And there are very clear recommendations. Similarly, climate financing. So I hope that the recommendations themselves and all the discussions, because we have a very large number of participants and we've got important business people from every part of the world. So if we can get the mind share, and then we can have the follow-up mechanism so that we can continue this dialogue, because whatever will be the final recommendations, there will be additions tomorrow, there will be tweaks tomorrow. So how do we engage in that process on an ongoing basis? If we can achieve these two, then I think we would have made a huge impact.
Last, if no one else, Chetan Bhutani of India Today.
Good evening, sir. My question to you would be on the rising global inflation and recessionary fears. You mentioned about 54 policy decisions that the various task forces have submitted. Is there a point of discussion on these two topics, sir? And would you be recommending such measures to the government as well in the times to come?
So there are two questions. First of all, to my mind, it's now low growth, low inflation. The inflation actually coming down. The problem is more growth. Okay. And I think the latest I've heard is that there's unlikely to be a recession anywhere. The issue is more growth. So there are some recommendations on promoting growth. Growth, economic growth, and promoting trade and promoting investments. That's a theme which is integrated with global supply chains. So that is one task force. So you will find recommendations on that, and we also have some very strong economic views that will be expressed in the conference.
Last, Shovik Das, Mint.
Hi. Sir, two-part question linked to both your mention of the building up a resilient global supply chain as well as regulation of AI. Given that there are different nations adopting different regulations, is it possible for multiple nations to sort of comply or agree upon a common sort of regulation to kind of have a supply chain that also interoperates while serving nations of their own purpose?
You are talking two different topics. The supply chain is a topic which all businesses will agree that we need both efficiency and resilience. And there are multiple times I have also spoken about it, that what India should focus on is the India Plus supply chain, which provides an alternative. And that is a real possibility, whether it is in electronics, whether it is in high-tech manufacturing or semiconductors, or you talk about defense, or you talk about pharmaceuticals, you talk about any industry. It is a huge possibility, and we need to build the whole ecosystem. The supply chain is ecosystem play. Nobody can do it alone. India, because of its size and a vast talent pool, significant advantage that we have, we should take the lead. But we need to work with other nations. The second one is on generative AI. Yes, there is a regulatory framework required. I mean, the question is not, you don't want to start by saying, is it possible? We need to work towards making it possible. So anytime you need to, most of it is about building scenarios and educating. Because the technology is moving very fast. And for every possible positive case, there is always a negative case. So that is why it's very important to talk about it, important to champion it, and create the regulatory frameworks.
So, any wrap-up comments from your side, please? Yeah.
I think the point I would like to make is that it has been an incredible 9 months for me personally. I've had the opportunity to work with a very, very large number of top people giving time. So the quality of output that has come is very, very, very good, very strong. Lot of thought has gone in, lot of inputs have gone in. We've got US view, we've got Western view, we've got the emerging market view, we've got the views of the global South, we've got views of business people, we've got views of multilateral organizations, we've got an employment view. So the engagements have been very, very intense, and the people who will be participating have all been part of the whole exercise, So what you will hear is an experience that has come through over a lot of deliberations over the last several months. And I think if we can build consensus and get mind share, because in the audience we have a large number of business leaders again from across the world, as Chandrajit said, across 55 countries. So we have all the right people there. We need to build that mind share and consensus. If we can do that, we can start to follow through, especially after the recommendations have been submitted to the G20, because the G20 has to deliberate on these recommendations. And whatever is the final outcome, if we can follow through, I really think that we can make a very good impact in the areas that I mentioned. So that's what I'm looking forward to. Definitely there'll be a lot of learning sitting there for 2 days. Thank you all very much for being here and being there tomorrow.
Good. Thank you.
Let's now shift our focus, to the latest debutant on the Lal Street, and that is TVS Supply Chain Solutions. So the stock listed at a mild premium. It listed at a premium of 5% at 207.05 rupees on the National Stock Exchange and 206 on the Bombay Stock Exchange. And we have the management with us. We have with us Mr. Ravi Vishwanathan, who is the Managing Director at TVS Supply Chain Solution. Mr. Vishwanathan, very good morning, and